Hi, hello everyone. This is Dr. Brahmayya, Associate Professor, Department of S&H, Chemistry Subject, MLR Institute of Technology, Hyderabad. Today I am going to talk about boiler troubles. So, the overview of the boiler troubles, you can see here boilers, scales, sludges, caustic embrittlement. We will talk about these contents. Actually, what is boiler? Boiler is a device that generates steam in the industry applications purposes. It consists two principles, two principal parts. One is furnace, which provides heat usually by burning a fuel and converts feed water into steam. And the steam of the hot fluid as a second principal part, the steam or the hot fluid recirculation in the boiler and used this process in various industrial applications. So these are the two major things in the boiler will happen. One is the furnace. By using the furnace, we will, if you look into the figure here, it is a boiler. This is a feed water, and this is the blast furnace. So which can give you continuous heating. So by this heating, the feed water will be boiled or hot fluid will be formed and it will be recirculated in the boilers. But then what is feed water? This feed water is generally in the industry for the boilers, they will take from different sources of the ponds, lakes and rivers. They will take the water from the different nearby sources to make the steam, to prepare the steam in the industry purposes in many cases. So that before we are adding the feed water into the boiler, before we are pouring the feed water into the boiler, we have to check whether this water is suitable for the boiler or not. So before adding, we have to check what is the hardness causing salts. Concentrations. We have to check the concentration of the hardness causing salts. So the hardness should be 0.45 to 1 ppm. The hardness is like in this range. So hardness should not be there in the boiler. It should be free from the many minerals. It should be free. Otherwise, they will form different kinds of problems in the boilers. What are those? Scales. Scales are hard deposits. They will stick to the inner surface of the boiler. They are difficult to remove even with the help of the hammer and chisel and are the main source of the boiler troubles. Boilers always troubled by scales and sludges. We will discuss about the scales and sludges. So initially we are discussing about the scales. Scales may be found inside the boiler. Due to decomposition of the calcium bicarbonates. See here, the calcium bicarbonate is forming as a scale like calcium carbonate and water and CO. However, scale composed chiefly of the calcium carbonate is soft and is the main cause of the scale formation in low pressure boilers. But in high pressure boilers, CaCO3 is soluble due to the formation of the CaOH twice, calcium hydroxide. Calcium carbonate will react with the water and it will form soluble calcium hydroxide compound by evolution of CO2 gas. The scales and sludges, how they are forming in the boiler. Loose precipitate suspended in the water, that is called sludge. See, these are the loose precipitates in the boiler. When we are heating, the water will be boiling and then the minerals or suspended particles will be in the water vapors like suspended particles. So this is called sludge. Whereas are the adhering coating on inner wall of the boiler. So the inner walls of the boilers will be adhering coatings by these suspended sludge particles. So these are the sludge particles deposited on the inner walls of the boiler. These are called scales. So here see, in the boiler we are heating, the feed water is this one. While we are heating, the suspended particles are like this, sludges, and then the sludges will be deposited as a scales on the inner walls of the boiler. So this is the in real time applications how the boiler will become like this because of this sludges and scales. In industries, generally we can see this kind of boilers because of the many hardness causing salts and some inorganic minerals. So if the feed water is not good, the boilers will become like this and they will lose their strength. Disadvantage of the scales. Wastage of the fuel. If the boiler is having a scales in its inner walls, then the heat must be consumed more and more to make the steam in the boiler. Scales have a poor thermal conductivity, so the rate of the heat transfer from the boiler to inside water is greatly reduced. So we have to give the more energy. In order to provide a steady supply of the heat water, excessive or overheating is done and this causes increase in the fuel consumption. Lowering of the boiler safety. Due to the scale formation, overheating of the boiler is done in order to maintain a steady supply of the steam. Due to the scale formation, overheating of boiler will be happening, so which is not good for the boiler. It makes the boiler material softer and weaker. This causes distortion of the boiler tube and also makes the boiler unsafe to bear the pressure of the steam, especially in high pressure boilers. In high pressure boilers, if the scales are formed in the inner walls of the boiler, the pressure generated or produced by the steam, if it is very high pressure, then the boiler cannot sustain for a long period. It will be blasted maybe. Decrease in efficiency. Deposition of the scales in the valves and condensers of the boiler choke them partially. This results in the decrease in the efficiency of the boiler. Danger of the explosion. As we just said, when thick scales crack due to the uneven expansion, the water comes suddenly in contact with the overheated portion and large amounts of steam is formed instantaneously. This results in development of the sudden high pressure which may cause explosion of the boiler. So this is the example of the exploded boiler. Due to the scales formation, due to the lack of the maintenance of the boiler, they will lose their strength. In the long run, they will be lose their strength and they will be exploded. If you are not maintaining properly with the different methods to remove the scales and sludges, it will be broke down. How to avoid scales? Scales are removed by mechanical methods or by chemical methods. If the scales are loosely adhering, it can be removed with the help of the scraper or piece of wood or wire brushes. Some kind of brushes also we can use to remove the scales. If they are loosely held with the inner walls of the boiler. If the scales are brittle, it can be removed by giving thermal shocks. That is, heating the boiler and then suddenly cooling with cold water. Then automatically this will be removed. This is also one technique. These are the physical methods. If the scales are loosely adhering, they can also be removed by frequent blow down operation. Blow down operation is a partial removal of the hot water through a tap at the bottom of the boiler. At the bottom of the boiler, if you can give a tap, a small taps on it, then the loosely held scales will be removed. When extent of the hardness in the boiler becomes a alarming high, makeup water is addition of the fresh softened water to boiler after blowdown operation. If it is excess, if you can confirm there is a alarming high of the boiler scales, you have to make up water is addition of the fresh water softened water to the boiler after blowdown operation. Then scales will be removed. If the scales are adherent and hard, they can be removed by dissolving them by adding chemicals like calcium carbonate. Scales can be dissolved by using 5 to 10% of the HCl. When you're adding the 5 to 10% of the HCl, a calcium carbonate kind of scales will be removed. Calcium sulfate scales can be removed by the adding of EDTA because EDTA can form a complexes very easily with the calcium sulfates. Since the calcium EDTA complex is highly soluble in water, that is most useful method to add EDTA to the boiler water. Then the scales will be removed easily. Next, sludges. What are sludges? As we discussed in the figure also we can see in the last picture. What are the sludges? What are the scales? Scales also we have been already discussed. Sludge is a soft, loose and slimy precipitate formed within the boiler. When the boiler is in the process of the making the steam, then the feed water will become like a loosely held precipitate with a steam in the boiler. Sludges are formed by substances which have greater solubilities in hot than in cold water. For example, magnesium carbonate, magnesium chloride, calcium chloride, magnesium sulfate, etc. They are formed at comparatively in colder portions of the boiler and get collected at the places where the flow rate is slow. They can be easily removed, scraped off with a wire brush. If sludges are formed along with scales, then former gets entrapped in the latter and both get deposited as a scales. This is the content. Actually, the sludges also can be removed by like brushes, wire brushes, scraped off by wire brushes because when they are before forming the scales, when they are loosely tied, loosely held with the boiler, then it is very easy to remove them by brushes using the brush. Prevention methods by using the softened water by frequently blow down operation, that is partially removal of the concentrated water through a tap at the bottom of the boiler when extent of the hardness in the boiler becomes alarming high. Caustic embrittlement. Caustic embrittlement is a phenomenon in which boiler material becomes brittle due to the accumulation of the caustic substances. Boiler water usually contains a small proportion of the Na2CO3, sodium carbonate. In high pressure boilers, this undergoes decomposition to give sodium hydroxide. This sodium hydroxide flows into the minute cracks usually present on boiler materials by capillary action and dissolves the surrounding area of the iron as a sodium ferrite. This is the sodium ferrite. This causes brittlement of the boiler parts, particularly stressed parts like bends, joints, rivets, etc., causing even failure of the boiler. If the boiler is having a joints and bends and rivets at the juncture, this causes brittlement of the boiler, particularly stressed parts like these things because of the scales and sludges. During the process of the following reaction will take place. Sodium carbonate plus water gives rise to CO2 and sodium hydroxide solution. And then iron will react with the boiler inner wall. Since it is iron, it will react with sodium hydroxide. It will form Na2 FeO2, which is like sodium ferrite and hydrogen. This is the caustic embrittlement. So finally, in summary, it is concluded that in the presentation, what is boiler and how it will be affected by the boiler feed water. The presentation also covers the boiler troubles like formation of the scales, sludges, and caustic embrittlement. The disadvantages of the scales and sludges being explained in the presentation. Thank you.